After 3 years and a lot of money, the Michigan Attorney General squeals the brakes on the Flint water investigation and vows to start over. That comes as a new report may change our understanding of what happened and how bad it was. And the growing pains in Eastern Market. Can it stay the same and yet improve at the same time? Today is Sunday, June 16, 2019, and this is Flashpoint. All right, welcome to Flashpoint. And if you live in Flint, you certainly feel like we hit another flashpoint last week in that city's long-running odyssey. On Thursday, Attorney General Dana Nessel announced she's dropping all of the standing charges in the Flint water investigation and basically rebooting the entire thing. She had already dispatched Todd Flood as the special prosecutor and replaced him with her own team of Fadwa Hammoud and Kim Worthy. But this was no doubt a slap at the way the investigation had been handled by her predecessor, Bill Schuette. May have also been that she saw the cases might be on shakier ground than she'd like, and she wants another and perhaps even broader run at those deemed responsible. But it came just after a new report from researchers at Virginia Tech that might put a new spin on the science, the lead in the water readings at the very heart of the entire ordeal. Among the findings, that the highest lead levels might actually have been from before Flint's water, which switched over to the Flint River. How's that possible? And what would that mean for the restart of the prosecution? It is a lot to sort through, and coming up this morning, we'll try to get to the bottom of it with Mark Edwards, one of those researchers from Virginia Tech, who'll talk about their new findings. And a little later on, we're going to continue our examination of the state of affairs at Eastern Market. Can a resurgent Detroit keep its authentic heart and soul in places like the market? It's all today on Flashpoint. Quite a week in the Flint water crisis with Dana Nessel dropping the existing charges against 8 different defendants, including the state's former health director. Has a lot of Flint residents today confused and voicing frustration as the clock resets. But this morning, I want to turn our attention to the release of a new study on the causes and depths of the crisis. The latest finding from Mark Edwards and Siddhartha Roy, 2 Virginia Tech researchers who studied the sludge in the Flint water system and found what they say is the first real evidence that corrosive water led to elevated lead levels in Flint's children. But it includes other findings which are surprising. And Dr. Mark Edwards joins us from Blacksburg, Virginia this morning. Dr. Edwards, I really appreciate your time. I want to start, if you could, I think I'll just let you react to what you were thinking as you heard last week that the charges had been dropped and the Michigan Attorney General was starting everything over.
Well, I was disappointed that the cases were handed to her in the fashion that they were, in the state they were. We've been outspoken about some of the prosecution's theories, their witness credibility, and also the lack of evidence. And so I think that this is probably a good thing overall because it's quite likely one of the cases would have been dismissed today for all the reasons we just mentioned.
Well, then I'm wondering if you think then that this new research that you've brought forward as you studied, you kind of had to go back and look at sludge levels in the sewers system to kind of try and rebuild what had happened years ago. I'm wondering if you think that there are implications of your research now for the way that the case should be prosecuted.
Well, I don't think so. What our results really did is confirm the data of Dr. Monahan Atish and our prior conceptualization that the blood lead of children roughly doubled in the summer after the switch. And we've always maintained that what happened in Flint was a crime, specifically by the employees of Michigan Department of Environmental Quality who failed to implement corrosion control that caused this. But at the same time, the data also answers questions about what we didn't know before. Recall the samples collected of the water were cheated, basically. They were illegal. And so we didn't know what was happening in the water. And so we looked at the sewage sludge because all the drinking water goes into the sewage with the idea that maybe that could reveal the unknown and resolve some of the uncertainties, and it did. And what it showed is that the levels of exposure weren't as bad as we initially had feared, and that indeed Flint had probably had lead and water problems even before the water crisis.
So to say that it was not as bad as you once feared, how should, if I live in Flint, what are you saying to me and how should I take that?
Well, we still feel that the water elevated the blood lead of children, especially in the summer after the switch occurred, and that what happened was a crime. It never should have happened. It was a failure of government at all levels. But at the same time, in the absence of data, some people jumped to the conclusion that all kids had been harmed very seriously, or in some cases even all kids had been brain damaged. Obviously that is not the case at all. What our data showed was that the elevations that occurred were not much higher than what was considered normal about 5 or 6 years earlier. That's not to excuse the fact that blood leads were elevated, and we do feel that this is a crime, but it's important to keep this in perspective.
Well, and part of that perspective, when your paper said that the highest levels that you could actually find were from 2011, well before the switch to the Flint River had ever been made, does that change culpability in all of this? And what does that mean long term? And as you try to piece together the whole story of what happened in Flint?
Yeah, we don't think it changes culpability. We think this was criminal, that people should be punished for what happened. But it does put it into some perspective that the damage to children, the damage to the average person in Flint was not as bad as some of the media outlets had portrayed it as. And so, you know, we really filled in a great unknown here, because a lot of the angst was coming from the fact that there was no good lead and water data, and we've actually filled that in really remarkably. And we have a picture of the Flint water crisis that, frankly, isn't what we thought it would be at first, but it's remarkably consistent with the trends in children's blood lead. And so together, I think it tells the story, at least of the lead exposure during the Flint water crisis.
Well, and you mentioned earlier that it still means that a lot of people are culpable for what they did. Last year, you felt that the blame did not rely so much with Health and Human Services, but more with the DEQ, which has now, of course, undergone a name change, but the department remains the same. Has this finding changed where you think the culpability is? And do you think it stops at the governor's door, or does it go into the governor as well?
Well, all of the data that we have seen, that we uncovered in our Freedom of Information Act request and posted on our website, frankly, that was the data that was used at the prosecution. We didn't see much additional evidence. And based on our conclusion, and anyone can read it and make their own conclusions, we decided that the culpability really rested with a few engineers and scientists at the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality who had complete responsibility for corrosion control, had complete responsibility for this law, lied about it in writing to the EPA, misled people. And so if that's not criminal, I don't know what is. But amongst the people they misled included the mayor of Flint and nearly everyone else who was looking into this matter. And so it's one thing to tell a lie and another thing to believe a lie. And folks can, you know, look at the emails that we gathered and make their own decisions.
And lastly, your thoughts on this matter with regards to the governor's culpability himself. We saw this past week that Dana Nessel had subpoenaed his phone, which he said he had already turned in long ago. So obviously this is a matter they're looking into.
Well, we really look at the facts, and you always have to be open to the idea that some evidence could be forthcoming tomorrow. But here we are, some 2.5 years into this investigation, and the evidence that I saw in relation to Dr. Wells and Mr. Lyon and Mr. Snyder doesn't come close to anything that looks like guilt or direct culpability to me. We've said they were certainly overly trusting of these engineers and scientists who were lying to anyone who was asking questions. But, you know, as we said, it's one thing to believe a lie and another one to tell one yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously a fascinating new chapter that you provided to an already very lengthy book. Dr. Mark Edwards at Virginia Tech University, I really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. We'll talk more about this as we continue. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Back with more in just a minute.
What is this? text message from the Wayne County Treasurer's Office about my payment plan?
That's right. Our Project Text Message program allows you to enroll in our free text messaging service. All you have to do is provide your cell phone number. I'm here today with one of our customer service representatives, Karim Howell. She will explain how it works.
Our customer service team will send friendly reminders and text alert updates about your current payment plan. Everyone gets busy. We want to help you stay on track with your tax payments to avoid foreclosure. Call 313-224-5990 to enroll in our voluntary program. You will receive reminders on tax payment due dates and other important valuable information.
Join Project Text Message today by calling 313-224-5990 or email our office at textinfo@waynecounty.com. Stay in touch. Stay connected.
You want to find businesses you can trust. That's why you start your search with BBB. We have over 4 million profiles in our business directory and nearly 400,000 accredited businesses committed to meeting high standards. Start with trust. Start with BBB.
All right, welcome back. Off our conversation with Dr. Edwards, let's talk more about what happened with the Flint investigation this past week with Stephen Henderson from WDET in Detroit today and Randy Richardville, the former Senate Majority Leader in Lansing. I'm really curious as to, Stephen, you had Dana Nessel on your program on Friday morning, I think it was. It's interesting, with all of the hullabaloo and the frustration right now in Flint, I think she's trying to say, look, there's more to come. But where do you think that this is, what drove this?
So I think if you talk with the investigators who are working this case, they all say that they have been surprised at what they call the shoddy work that was done under Bill Schuette on this issue, and that the prosecutions that were underway just were not solid enough for them to continue, which is one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is that I think they have seen enough so far in their own investigations to say there's likely to be other kinds of charges and maybe some other people charged who they hadn't charged before. But boy, I think it's an incredible risk to expunge all of this now, right? Say we're going to start from scratch and then expect everybody to come along, not least of all jurors, perhaps, to say this is something entirely different than what we've thought it was before.
Randy, clearly a lot of money has already been spent on this that I guess we're sort of flushing away now, but maybe more than that to the people of Flint is the time. It all feels like, all of that was for nothing? We have to start over, really?
Yeah, I think I've looked at this from a lot of different angles. I wasn't in office, obviously, when this happened, but I watched it and watched what I consider to be one of the most egregious character assassinations that I've seen in Michigan history. What they did to Governor Rick Snyder, a guy who, when the problem was obviously found out, people are throwing rocks and throwing blame all over the place, and he got up at the State of the State, and maybe his greatest strength as a governor was that he wasn't a politician. It could also be considered his greatest weakness, that he wasn't a politician. But he got up and said, look, everybody's throwing blame around, put the blame here. I don't care. Let's put the blame aside and let's start solving the problems. And he's one of the best problem solvers I've ever met in my life. But the blame, everybody turned and threw it at him. They forgot about the Detroit turnaround.
Well, there's political blame and then there's legal blame.
There's legal blame.
Yeah, right. But I don't see where
I'm not sure he was taking on the legal responsibility for it when he said that.
No, not at all, not at all. And I've worked with Rick very closely. I wasn't friends with him before he got elected, but because of fate, both of us ended up in the same room working together on the same problems. I found him to be a very compassionate guy, a guy that puts everything he has into anything that he does, and that there's no way I can believe that he knew anything about this, any kind of cover-up.
And Dr. Edwards really didn't seem, as you just heard him say, he doesn't really see culpability going all the way that far up. Although it was interesting, the subpoenaing of his, I think the governor kind of felt that was showboating. He'd already turned in all of his devices.
He'd already given all of that stuff over. I'm not willing to give him that kind of clean bill of health here because I think we don't know. And this is part of what Nessel's team, and it's not her team, I mean, it's kind of an independent investigation. She's really clear about that. I think part of what they're saying is we don't know, that there's not been the kind of investigation that there should have been into who's culpable and for what, in order to determine what charges should be leveled. So, I'm also somebody who got to know Rick Snyder over the last 9 years and think highly of him in some ways. I have some other criticisms of him. I don't know what his culpability was here because I think the investigation hadn't been done to determine that. And if he is responsible, I think this team won't hesitate to make that clear.
You don't think there are enough motivated people out there to go after Rick Snyder and, just as importantly, Nick Lyons, who devoted his life to children and children's kinds of issues, to put them in the kind of situation that they did for the last couple of years? You don't think there was anybody motivated enough within the Attorney General camp or within law enforcement or from Flint you don't think this is complete? You think we don't know after 2 years, we still don't know?
What they're saying, if
it was there, they should have found something.
If I knew, if I'd seen the evidence, I could speak with more authority on that. But I think what they're saying, and there are some high-powered prosecutors involved in this at this point, people with a lot of experience, they're saying that this hasn't been investigated, that there has not been the kind of evidence collected.
She says there are millions of documents that haven't been looked at. I don't know if that's hyperbole. Millions seems...
She said it was literally millions that they've now uncovered that were never looked at before. And if that's true, then I think it was probably premature to say that how high this goes or who's responsible. I mean, I think we have to wait, and this is the dilemma for people in Flint, I think, is it's more waiting. I mean, how long has this gone on without them getting some sort of resolution and justice in this case? I think after they're done this time, though, we can say they looked at everything there was to look at and determined one way or another what should be done.
Lawyers talk about this wall that they sometimes have to create, and she's on the one side right now. Randy, this is a really strange situation, though, where the Attorney General has to defend the state against civil action, but on the other hand, prosecute those that they feel erred in the name of the state.
Yeah, it's hard to understand what the role is supposed to be, and that actually happened last term, too. I think when that special prosecuting team was put together to investigate Flint. Was that political? You could argue it was. You could argue it wasn't. Is this political? Same thing. I think as much investigation into whether it's political or whether it's factual would make sense to me, too. But these people have been, their lives have been hurt. Their families have been hurt. Some terrible things have been happening to people that
Are you talking about the people of Flint?
I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about everybody. I'm talking about,
But the real harm here was always done to the people of Flint. And the people who are suffering these consequences of prosecution and other things, that's because of their own actions.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah, but it hasn't been allegedly in the press and in lots of other places.
I'm afraid we got to leave it there. Yeah. Thanks, guys, very much for the conversation. We come back, Dan Carmody on Eastern Market. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
DTE Energy wants to help you build Michigan's future. Whether your business is large, small, or in between, a DTE expert can partner with you to suggest new technologies and incentives to help you save money. Money you can use to create jobs and invest in the future. Because when your business thrives, Michigan does too. DTE Energy.
The region is on the rise. Project after project, building, growing, innovating. We're building the future right now. Hard work matters here. IBEW Local 58 electricians and NECA signatory contractors bring commitment, pride, expertise, and passion to every job. It's our code of excellence. One vision, one team, one mission. To build the very best Michigan for all of us. Put us to work for you. The best contractors, the best electricians, period.
Gowling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram has earned the FCA Customer First Award for Excellence certified by J.D. Power.
That's the Gowling difference. Only at Gowling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram, your Chrysler store.
During the Chrysler Pacifica Blockbuster Sales Event, all 2018 Chrysler Pacificas are $11,000 off. Or during the Jeep Celebration Event, all 2018 Jeep Wranglers are $6,500 off. See dealer for details. Get to Gowling Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram on Telegraph, north of Square Lake, just west of I-75 and exit 75.
All right, we have talked a lot lately about what's happening at Eastern Market, Russell Street Deli ready to move out, some worries and tensions about new landlords and what some fear are changing priorities. Well, on Mackinac Island at this year's policy conference, I had a chance to sit down and talk about it with the president of Eastern Market, Dan Carmody.
I've told you before, it is one of my very favorite things about Detroit, and I'm so not unusual in that sense.
No.
Everybody that you talk to, I think, feels very invested in the place.
12 years I've had the great fortune of working at a place that is beloved by many. So it's truly a blessing to be shouldered some of the responsibility of making sure that Eastern Market survives and keeps its soul intact as things change. And my new line
Yes.
My new line is that we're 128 years old and we didn't get that way by not changing.
Well, in fact, I quoted you on Flashpoint a couple weeks ago because your great line to me was, people come up and tell you two things, which are?
Don't change a thing, just make it better.
Exactly, which is kind of some would say is a fool's errand.
No.
But you have become, I think now, very central to this conversation about how Detroit keeps its soul, the things that we all love about Detroit, while at the same time grows at the pace that it currently is.
Yeah, and I think that's doable. It's not going to be easy. We actually saw this problem coming about 3 years ago because we looked around and we saw, one could say that Eastern Market has not changed much over the last 50 years because of the failure of Detroit commercial real estate. Because if you look around over that last same 50 years, all of our peers around the country disappeared as those neighborhoods became bars and boutiques and lofts, and the food part of it scattered.
Yeah.
And so we looked around in 2015 and said, that wave is finally getting to Detroit. It's going to be coming at us.
Yep.
And it is, and it has.
Yep.
And so the strategic plan that we developed that we're quite proud of, that inspired the city, this summer they'll be announcing a master plan that basically takes that strategic plan and sort of builds out what we do. We haven't stopped. We've been doing it while we talk about how we do it. It's two principal items. One is all those other places around the country did not have the significant amount of vacant land that we have to the north and to the east of Eastern Market. Mm-hmm. So our first priority the last 3 years has been trying to find sites to keep the larger, more established food companies that are currently in the Eastern Market District who need to expand, but they're landlocked.
Yeah.
Wolverine Packing Company just finished construction of a 140,000 square foot facility that will enable them to add 75 new employees on an 8-acre site.
Yep.
And we have 4 more companies behind them. Together, that's about 500,000 square feet of new food processing and production space and about 350 to 450 jobs.
It is weird that in a place so close to downtown, you actually have room to expand that way.
It's not easy.
But it's not, and it's only going to get harder.
And the reason we're unique is that we're near that heart of the city, and most food districts have leapfrogged because food businesses can't pay the same per square foot that other types of businesses, particularly mixed-use developers of condos, can.
Yeah.
And so when we think about gentrification of Eastern Market, our first priority is how do we retain, through all this change, 120 years, we're still 3 things we were in 1891. We're a place about food.
Yep.
We're a place where small businesses get started, particularly by people who have limited means. And we're a place where everybody, regardless of where they come from in their life, are welcome.
Let's talk about the current test tube case. You don't have to look very hard on social media to find the vilification of the Nelsons, Lyndon and his son Sanford. And I'm curious about just what you tell people about watching this dust up that has now got Russell Street Deli, which is, I think a lot of people feel is foundational to Eastern Market, and it's leaving.
So Russell Street Deli is a key contributor. And there are a core group of businesses that I would call dancing with who brung you, that
yes.
These are core businesses that we need to figure out a way to sustain, even if they're not able to afford the sudden surge in pricing from rents. So that's one of the principles that we identify in a Eastern Market real estate development protocol that we released earlier this week. And 2 sets of protocols, one for food businesses, one for non-food businesses, real estate developers. And in those protocol are 16 criteria that we are going to judge developments by, whether we will give our support as an organization to that project or not.
Yeah.
One of those is setting aside space. We're asking developers to figure out how to set aside as much as 10% of their space in new projects to be held at more reasonable, affordable rents to do one of 3 things. One is keep long-time businesses that are part of our fabric.
Current, yep.
2 is, and probably more important than even that, is keeping a mix of businesses that allows for the sale of everyday goods and services to low and moderate income residents of the neighborhoods that live around Eastern Market. And 3, the arts has become an important part of the Eastern Market. So artists or arts, nonprofit arts organizations, how do we find low-cost space for them to occupy? So we don't have dictatorial control. We rely upon those at public agencies like the city, the state, or other sources of either regulatory approvals or incentives that developers need to do their projects. They typically will look to us and say, what do you think? And we have to be organized here, and this is a service to the developers too. 16 criteria that you should think about not after you've planned your project, but as you begin planning your project.
Yeah.
And so it contrasts a little bit with a community benefits agreement process, which kind of comes in towards the end.
Yep.
And the developer's already, got 90. He's got it financed. He's got, you can only change it so much. We think that the criteria that we've given people that will help us defend our soul, we're not expecting everyone to hit on all 16, but we are expecting them to hit on enough that they get to a score, yet to be determined how we score them. But if you don't have a plan on how to relocate a commercial or retail tenant, we're not going to support your project. And so I think a lot of the dust up with the Russell Street Deli project had been, if there had been a written tenant relocation plan, a lot of this could have been avoided. And so,
how much of a loss is it for the market?
Well, we haven't necessarily conceded the loss of Russell Street Deli. We are working with them. We're on a short list of spaces that they're looking to.
When we had them on Flashpoint a couple weeks ago, they sounded one foot out the door.
We have a letter of intent. They haven't executed it yet. There's a space in the market where they could combine both the retail facility and their wholesale facility, which we think would give them a much better, stronger business overall. So they may not. It's probably going to be a little more expensive for them to build that space out than some others they might be able to find. So I don't know if we'll keep them, but I do go to bed comfortably knowing we've done everything we can do to keep them in Eastern Market.
And we've got the full conversation with Dan. If you'd like to see more on clickondetroit.com, just look for our Mackinac coverage. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. See you next time on Flashpoint.